Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It is part 3 of the Q&A series, and what were you looking at there?
Nothing. I'm paying full attention. What are we doing? Part 3 of the
questions, and you've got to answer them. So put your tools away and let's get to it. Let's get to some PC hardware questions.
You have my full attention, Tim. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Today's video is sponsored by Gigabyte and their brand new range of Radeon RX 6700 XT graphics cards, including the Gaming OC and Aorus Elite. The Gaming OC is a high quality yet minimalistic graphics card, whereas the Aorus Elite adds a little extra bling with its RGB Fusion 2.0 lighting. Both models pack large triple slot WindForce 3X coolers featuring direct touch heat pipes, a full-size aluminium backplate, and they're overclocked out of the box for maximum gaming performance. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Do you think that people getting caught up in the hype and impulse buying if they see stock is adding to the immense shortages in availability? So do you think people running out and just buying stuff willy-nilly is creating a shortage of supply? Short answer to that one is no.
Yep.
Don't think so. With the release of all GPU series, the initial wave of not hype but demand certainly sees those products go out of stock, but you would usually see them come within 2 weeks to 2 months. They would be relatively easy to purchase. But what we're seeing here is a whole heap of things. It's obviously, a lot more people are gaming because of the whole 2020 COVID pandemic thing where people were at home and they're looking for things to do and they got into PC gaming. So there are plenty more gamers looking to buy graphics cards now. But then you also have the global pandemic, which hurt shipping times, hurt production. And then you have the whole trade wars thing, tariffs. So that's also increasing prices. The trade war is more about supply, again, hurting the supply chains. And then have I mentioned that little thing called cryptocurrency yet? that also shot up last year and continued to the start of this year and probably still is. So there's a whole heap of factors that have driven up demand for GPUs.
What do you guys think about the current value proposition offered by consoles at the moment given the current GPU shortage? Do you think many people are going to jump ship from PC gaming to console since hardware seems to be getting more scarce by the day? So I think we've had this question in one of the Q&As before. I believe this was, your standard upvoted type situation. I guess the current value proposition offered by the consoles is limited by almost the exact same thing that we're seeing with GPUs, in that you actually just can't go and buy these consoles. You can't buy a PS5. I believe the Xbox is still very high in demand, and that has inflated the prices of these, consoles on the secondhand, not the secondhand market, but like the scalper market on eBay and those places, where prices are almost inflated by the same sort of ratios that we're seeing with GPUs, where prices are like 60% higher, twice as expensive to buy like a PS5 from eBay. So that is not going to cause a lot of people to jump ship from PC gaming to console gaming, because if someone's, wants a GPU and is waiting for it to come in stock, they have to do the exact same thing to buy a console. So if there was a situation where in the future we had a lot of PS5 supply and not much GPU supply, then potentially you'd have that happening. But as we've talked about in the past, they're kind of two very different things, and people that are already interested in potentially doing console gaming are probably already thinking about buying like a next gen or now current generation console anyway. So the proportion of people that are going to be jumping ship that have like an old PC, were thinking of upgrading it, can't get one, and now going to become a console gamer, I would imagine is pretty small. And there may only be maybe a couple of months of overlap where console supply is better than PC supply. But because the whole industry is affected at the moment, it's really not a situation I can see happening too often.
Alrighty. The disappointing performance of the RTX 3060 has left AMD with a huge opportunity. Do you think an RX 6600 XT/6600 will be able to offer better value at the $300 price range, similar to AMD's undercut of the RTX 2060 with the RX 5600 XT? Very different times, different situations for sure right now. Basically, it's what I've been saying in my last few more affordable, or meant to be more affordable, GPU reviews, such as the RTX 3060 and 6700 XT. Really, I don't expect AMD or Nvidia to release what we would deem to be good value GPUs in a market where they just sell absolutely everything they can produce as they produce it. So there's no incentive there for AMD to come in and undercut Nvidia. Expect them to do the usual, what we've seen. There'll be possibly at this price point, $10 discount, $10, $20 off. We'll get you a 6600 XT or whatever. So they're not going to come in and heavily undercut Nvidia. It's just not going to happen. It's just, that would happen in a market where supply is easily meeting the demand, which is certainly not what we've been seeing for quite some time now.
Yeah, and it is what we saw with the 5700 XT, where Nvidia's GPUs 2070 and the new Super Series that launched around that time, plenty of stock of those cards, plenty. So AMD could make moves where they undercut their competitor. But yeah, as you say, right now it just doesn't make any sense and won't happen.
Yeah, that's right. It's not even about they could make the moves. It's more they had to make the moves
they did.
To sell their product. So normally you would think something like a 6700 XT would have to be a bit cheaper than an RTX 3070 for AMD to move any significant volume. But right now they can offer, $20 off or whatever. And yep.
Next question. Why is it that there are only a few fabs producing semiconductors? I guess it depends whether you're talking like leading edge production or overall production, because right now there's only 2 to 3 fabs, depending on whether you include Intel in that or not, that do leading edge production. So you've got TSMC, Samsung, and then depending whether you count 10 nanometer on Intel's leading edge or not, Intel. But you do have several other manufacturers that produce older nodes, or they invest heavily in sort of the last generation technology that they can produce in bulk for chips that don't really need high performance. Like there's still a lot of volume of things that are done on like 45 nanometer, 32 nanometer, even like 100 plus nanometer that's done at places like Global Foundry and all those other fabs that don't necessarily focus on leading edge. So I guess part of that answer is there are more than just a few fabs producing semiconductors. But the other answer to that is that it's extremely expensive to make a fab. We're talking tens of billions of dollars for a single fab. So you can see Intel's latest announcements about fab investments. They're putting in like $20 billion to build like 1 or 2 fabs. TSMC spends I think they announced like $25 billion a year on fab investments. So if you're a new player in the market and you're not, especially if you're doing like older designs where you're more value, bulk order focused, how are you finding $25 billion to build a new fab? That's just extreme. It's just not going to happen. And that's compounded by the fact that, for example, EUV technology that's used for leading edge design is all manufactured, all the tools necessary are manufactured by one company. So there's no competition. So that's why you sort of see some of these issues where companies have to spend $25 billion because they have to spend, $1 billion on an EUV machine from that one company that makes them. So that's kind of the situation why we're in the fab market that we are right now. We potentially would have had 4 leading edge fabs if Global Foundries had continued keeping up with leading edge, but it just got too expensive for them. They just, do we invest $10 billion on making a leading edge fab, or do we just focus more on the non-leading edge stuff and try and get volume there, which is still a successful play for some companies. So yeah, that's pretty much the fab market.
Everyone seems to have forgotten about Windows 10 GPU scheduler. Does it affect performance with low-end CPUs? Well, we haven't forgotten about it because I actually put a comment in the very first video saying that I also tested with the Windows 10 GPU scheduler enabled and it made no difference even with the low-end CPUs. I also pinned a comment with that information as well. So we did provide that in the original review video as it went live. The Windows 10 GPU scheduler doesn't exactly do what it sounds like it does. So it doesn't really affect that. It doesn't somehow make NVIDIA's scheduling go from software on the driver side to somehow on the GPU. It does not do that, does not solve the issue there. And I'm not exactly sure where it's of benefit because I've not been able to find it. And I don't think anyone else has shown it either. So
not to any significant degree.
Not to any significant degree, no. Do you think the global situation has delayed the release of next gen? So I imagine he's talking about GeForce 40 series here, RX 7000 series, etc. No would be the answer. Both of those companies are in an arms race. You can't afford to just, sit back and not keep developing. And then if you've put billions of dollars or whatever it may be into development, you're going to have to release those products to recoup those funds. So I don't expect any delays. It's kind of like people were questioning, are they going to release Zen 3 because we're going into lockdown in all these countries around the world, global pandemic and all that. And Zen 3 went ahead pretty much without a hitch. So especially when we're in a situation, as we've been talking about, with demand so high, there's a lot of incentive for them to get their next products out and, start charging money for those.
Yeah, and a lot of there's two other things that can happen here as well. One of them is that a lot of the contracts for the silicon wafers that are bought for like upcoming nodes that are coming online, which are used for next gen products, are settled months, years in advance. So a company like Nvidia would have to go, hey, I want to use your next gen node in 2023 for our upcoming product. I'm buying this much allocation, which isn't going to change based on supply issues right now because that's a new node. It's going to be a different situation. And then on top of that, let's say you have an AMD that wants to use 7 nanometer again. Well, they could just stop manufacturing the old generation products and use that allocation to manufacture new generation products, which is probably what would happen if there was an ongoing supply issue, which fingers crossed doesn't happen. But that's one of the tactics they could use there. So no, won't impact this at all. And as you say, if they, fall behind, they really get into like an Intel situation where you have an older product competing against a newer product, and that never works out super well.
All right, Tim, another question here. There's a lot of talk about VRAM capacity nowadays, but very little testing. Obviously, allocated VRAM is not a useful metric, but one would think it's not too hard to just test a game at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K to see whether where there is a big drop off in performance. You wouldn't even have to do as many passes as normal, since you only care about seeing the drop off rather than actually measuring how much it drops. Why do you think nobody has done this? And do you think it's a gap you can fill? We have done VRAM testing before in the past, VRAM capacity testing. I think the last one I would have done was a very in-depth look at it. I think it was with the RTX 2060, if I remember correctly. So I guess I will work through answering this because there's quite a few different questions within this one question. So obviously allocated VRAM isn't a useful metric. I mean, it is kind of useful because we found that, allocation is generally very close to usage. And there are ways, I believe now, to look closer at the actual usage. But you don't want to just go off what it's using. I think we've sort of undersold allocation when it comes to VRAM capacity a bit, and the importance of it, because basically my understanding is it's allocating how much VRAM it believes it will use in a given scene. And that is if you look at all the potential texture areas in that scene. So with a benchmark pass, they can be a bit misleading, I suppose. Or again, they can be, because usually you take a set path and you're not like constantly scanning the area for enemies. And when you do that, that's what I believe you would be using closer to the allocated VRAM, because it's not loading, it's loading all the textures and stuff in the immediate scene that you're looking at. So yeah, I think allocated VRAM is probably a useful thing because you want to make sure that you've got that VRAM available so you can load everything you need to into VRAM if you have to. And generally, as I've said, we've found that usage and allocation for most games is pretty close anyway. So I'll leave it at that. It's not too hard to test different resolutions and stuff. Also, the duration of the time you spend in the game can affect stuff like that a little bit, though that's more probably system memory.
I think these
and the
days,
big drop off. Sorry, go on, Tim.
I was just going to say what you can see these days as well is that sometimes you do see VRAM, when you over allocate VRAM more than the amount of VRAM you have, you can obviously see performance drops, and we see that in some games. But in other games, depending on how it works, they also can just dynamically reduce the texture quality. So it does depend on the game, but it does make testing a little bit more complicated in that in some of those games you do need to look out for the performance drops, but then in others you need to actually do like a side-by-side visual comparison where you may get the same performance, but then you're just seeing like a much lower texture quality, which can obviously have a visual impact, then you're not really benchmarking the same thing. So yeah, it's interesting how these days you kind of get one or the other happening in games. It's not always just about the performance drop.
Exactly, and I'm glad you jumped in with that, because that actually leads into where I was heading with the next part of that, because he was saying, it's easy to test the big performance drop-off or whatever. But again, that performance drop-off can be masked, let's say, depending on your system specification. So we test with 32 gigabytes, dual rank, dual channel memory, and some of that allocation and potentially even usage can spill over into system memory. And yeah, you do see a performance drop-off, but depending on how far into that you dip, you can get away with certain things. So if you were testing in a system with slower memory or less memory, as in system memory, that will make it even more obvious to spot. So those things can also make testing a little bit tricky as well. So we've seen in the past, like 6 gigabyte VRAM cards perform much better in systems with plenty of system memory, especially if it's fast system memory. So that's another factor to consider as well. But yeah, it's not overly difficult to test. It's just a bit tricky. And as Tim said, it depends on the game, because they can handle running out of a VRAM in different ways. Some games won't even let you, like I think Doom Eternal won't allow you to apply the settings if you exceed the VRAM. And I think, like, as an example, what you were talking about, like I think Battlefield 5 is a game where you can turn on an option that will allow it to not properly load at the higher textures if you run out of VRAM. So it's lowering the overall image quality to avoid a performance hit.
Yep.
So there's all kinds of tricks like that. And I think, yeah, with VRAM, it really depends on again, like we say so many times, it depends on the type of gaming that you're doing as to how important VRAM is to begin with anyway.
Yep.
Because a lot of people are happy dialing things down a bit. They don't need the ultra HD texture packs loaded and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's definitely a video worth investigating and having a bit of a look at when we get, let's say, between product launches, which I don't know when that's going to happen again. But anyway, I hope you are mining with all the GPUs you have. If not, why? It is free money. I think we've talked about this many times in the past, but yeah, Tim and I don't mine with the GPUs we have because we use them for testing, and it's super annoying if they're in use somewhere.
Yep.
And we're not super motivated by money, I guess. We don't do this job for money. So we both have enough money. So yeah, that's kind of that one. And I don't have enough space to film and do B-roll, so I certainly don't have enough space to put bloody mining rigs together and do all that sort of stuff, and I couldn't be any less interested. It never got me excited or interested from the start, and it certainly hasn't now. So we're much more focusing all our energy on making content and doing the stuff we're passionate about. And again, we do this because we're passionate about it, not because it's money. Anyway, anything to add to that, Tim?
No, I mean, you pretty much summed up my feelings as well. It's not really something I'm super interested in doing. I mean, yeah, even stuff like the heat output of a mining rig would be not great. I'd have to run more air conditioners and stuff, which I don't really want to do. And then, it's just like the time and effort that it would take to set up a mining rig. It's like, do I focus that on making a video for YouTube, or do I focus that on setting up a mining rig? And if I'm honest, if I was even concerned about money, I'd probably make more money from making the YouTube video. So, considering that's my main job and all that situation, and GPUs only get, like a couple of dollars a day. So, if I could spend that time making content for our business, it's actually a much better investment than investing that time in mining on GPUs. So, yeah, and I did a poll recently on the community tab as well, asking people whether they think there's, the environmental impact of cryptocurrency mining. I think about 61% of our audience said they were concerned about the environmental impacts of cryptocurrency. So that's another factor that people consider when deciding whether to mine or not. So all those factors come into play. But yeah, it's the basics are I don't care. I just don't really, doesn't interest me. So yeah.
On that note, we'll move on to the next one. Have you guys tested or are planning to test resizable bar for the older GPU generations or chipsets? I got a BIOS update a few days ago that unlocked support on my RX 5700 and B450 motherboard. Well, first of all, I believe you require two components there. So you need the BIOS support, but you also need the support at the driver level. And are the 5000 series of GPUs even supported yet? Or I thought it was only 6000 series.
I'm not sure. I wouldn't imagine that would work. I wouldn't imagine that combination would work.
No, I believe for resizable bar to work with AMD GPUs, the driver supports 6000 series Radeon GPUs on 500 series motherboards with 5000 series processor or select 3000 series processors. If I'm recalling correctly, I believe that is the current situation. So although you have BIOS support, enabling it will do nothing. If you were to get support and it work on your platform, would we benchmark it? Probably not. I mean, we've already benchmarked it in like 30 games and we've seen where it works well and where it doesn't. That's not really going to differ. Like a 5700 series graphics card's not going to work really well in Microsoft Flight Simulator, whereas the 6000 series doesn't. And then, not work well in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where the 6000 series does. So we kind of know roughly what the gains are in each game, and it'll be roughly that across all of the Radeon GPUs. The GeForce GPUs, maybe they'll be different. Maybe that'd be worth testing. But yeah, not something we're going to invest any time in right now.
All right, Steve, I got one for you here. Off topic, but do you guys watch F1? If so, do you think the track changes in Melbourne is going to add more excitement into the racing? Well, I don't watch F1 and I have no idea what you're talking about, so take it away, Steve.
I've only been watching F1 for a few years now, but I very much enjoy it. I haven't really paid attention to the track changes for Melbourne, so I can't really comment on those, but obviously you'd be hoping for more exciting racing. And yeah, obviously I'm keen to see what the changes that they've made to the cars for this season do for the racing and how hard it is to follow and all that kind of stuff. And there'll be more changes obviously for next season as well, which should make it pretty exciting. But yeah, I think this is going to be one of the more interesting seasons we've had in a while. So I'm keen to see how it kicks off. And yeah, hopefully it's not just the Mercedes dominating at the front again and, overlapping everyone before race ends. So we'll see what happens.
When starting out, so a completely new build from scratch, I assume you're talking about here, how should you split your budget between PC and peripherals? I've always gone with cheaping out on the peripherals massively, like don't spend $250 on a keyboard and $100 on a mouse. Spend like $30 on a mouse and I guess you would still probably want a mechanical keyboard, so you probably still need to spend a bit there. But yeah, that tends to be how I've done. And then obviously monitor is important. Don't skimp on buying a 1080p 60Hz monitor for your new RTX 3080 build. Please don't do that. I'd be very upset and disappointed in you. Yeah, I think a monitor should really scale with your build. So if you're spending the more you spend on your build, the more you should spend on your monitor, proportional, obviously. Sorry, didn't mean to hit the mic there. Yeah, look, I would be focusing, even monitor aside, while I agree with Tim on the monitor comments, I would be focusing on getting your platform sorted out, get sort of the best value thing that makes sense for you. And then, if you've got a monitor from an older build or you've been given one, that's fine to use. But then, yeah, that my focus would be on getting a monitor that's up to spec for your gaming system. And then as for keyboard, mouse, headset, use whatever cheap crap you can get. I would not allocate any budget to that if you're tight on budget. I've been competitive gaming, or I used to competitive game. And while it's good to have a good mouse and it's good to have a good keyboard, it's not going to make you a significantly better gamer. Oh, no, so, the marketing execs are going to be after you now because that's what they try and tell you.
Within reason. Look, it's kind of like having a high refresh rate monitor. If you have the skills, it helps you utilize them, but it doesn't, you can get the world's crappiest gamer that's never going to be a good gamer for whatever reason and put them with an awesome keyboard and mouse, and it's not going to make a noticeable difference. And also, that personal aspect aside, your mouse is a USB mouse. It doesn't matter what platform you're connecting it to, it's a USB mouse. So you can upgrade that at any point in time and it will just fit in with your system. The keyboard is the same. So yep. Yeah, I mean, I would be focusing on the other components and then get that stuff later because, yeah, it's not as important as getting the right platform and the right value stuff. So if you invest in the wrong platform or you skimp on your motherboard or whatever, that can limit you and hurt the value and the longevity of your system. Whereas your mouse is like, oh, look, I bought a crap USB mouse for $10 and now I have $80 and I'll just plug that in and away you go. You've got a nicer mouse now.
Yeah, I think it even applies to some of the components in the system. Like, for example, usually when I've been doing budget builds back in the past, when that was sort of the thing I did, you skimp on things like the case, for example. Like, do you need a fancy $200 case? Probably not. So you put more into the platform, your CPU, motherboard, GPU, and things like storage as well. You can always add storage in later. Obviously, you need a performant boot drive. You don't want to be booting off a hard drive, so get yourself a good M.2 SSD to begin with. But then beyond that, if you start out with like a 1 terabyte drive, then you can easily add more storage into these platforms because they've got so many M.2 slots, so many SATA ports. Loading games off a SATA SSD, as we've shown before, is perfectly fine for gaming. Hard drives as well for some sorts of games are also fine. So yeah, those are sorts of areas that I would skimp on. And then your monitor can be upgraded, and I would expect it to last multiple PC build generations. It's
a good investment
if you get a good one.
Yeah, it's good to spend money on a monitor because, as you say, it does last. Other things as well as like cooling. $20 tower cooler.
Yep,
does
the job.
Trick for most. Yep. Yeah, it does the job. If you want to upgrade to something that looks better and works a bit better down the track, then whatever. Yep. But no need to go spending $100 on a really good cooler and skimp on other components. So you really want to get decent motherboard on the right platform, then decent CPU, decent graphics card, and go on from there. I'd sort of prioritize down from there. Anyway, that's probably going to do it.
All right, and that does us for the Q&A series for March of 2021. 3 parts, a lot of questions from our Discord community, which is where our Patreon Floatplane members hang out, the YouTube community tab. Pretty good variety of stuff. Tried to avoid doing a ton of stuff on the availability type questions. Got a few of them in there, but obviously this is a big talking point, but don't want to bore you guys with an hour and a half of talking about depressing lack of stock and all that sort of thing. So hopefully you guys did enjoy all 3 parts, and I guess if you've made it to the end of part 3, you're well and truly in the 20% club, given most other people have probably switched off by now. They've got sick of us and sick of our annoying faces. But yeah, it's been fun as always. Had a lot of fun on the live stream earlier today as well. So if you are a Patreon or Floatplay member, you can join in those monthly. And we also just recently did one of the first live streams on the main channel in about 2 years. So I really enjoyed doing that as well. Hopefully we'll be able to do more of those from time to time because it was great getting on there. And anything else to say before we call it quits on the Q&A for this month and you can get back to some benchmarking?
Yes, I desperately have to get back to editing, benchmarking, doing all that kind of stuff, video creation type things. But yes, there's plenty of bit more benchmarks to be run because we have some newish products next week. I don't know. I guess they're new.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I've got work to do regardless. So yeah, we better wrap this up and I better get back up to my office where I do all my testing and leave the shed behind.
Yep.
But as always, thank you very much for watching. And I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim. See you
next time.
Next one.